Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our public affairs forums, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Now, Peggy Morton will introduce our panel.
Hello, and thank you, Carolyn, and all the members of the Public Forum Committee. It is a great honor for me to introduce some panelists today who are a part of the Austin Sanctuary Network. While our state legislature has taken quantum leaps backwards recently, I'm honored to let the Austin community know that we have an Austin Sanctuary Network that is moving forward. Many of you know back in 2015, Guatemalan Soma Franco lived here in Sanctuary. So that was barely the beginning. And now more has happened, and much to the credit of the people up here on this panel, they have grown our group. And now we have 25 organizations who are a part of this Sanctuary Network, including 19 faith organizations and another 6 social justice nonprofits. So now I get to introduce these dear people to you. First, on my far left, this is the Reverend Babs Miller. She is an ordained Presbyterian minister and serves at the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, where Guatemalan Ilda and her son, Guatemalan mom Ilda Ramirez and her son Yvonne have lived in Sanctuary. And next to her is Dr. Josefina Castillo. She was a retired sociologist from Mexico when she first came here, and she started working for the Austin Friends Service Committee. That program morphed into the Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera, so close to the border. Not only does she represent them on the Sanctuary Network, but also she is one of the representatives from the St. Hildegard community. And next to her, we have Janet Cook, who is a longtime social activist. She was already working for social justice, environmental causes as a teenager, and she's continued to do this. She says she entered the middle class when she became a school psychologist, and now she's retired, and she is a member of the Texas State Employees Union, so she represents them, and she's also a lay leader at Trinity Church, where she also works, or volunteers. In fact, all of these panelists are volunteers. And next to Janet is Ann Glenn. Ann retired from the state of Texas, and she had worked for a long time for children. She had worked in the Texas Medicaid program, the CHIP program, and for child intervention. So the timing was perfect. She retired. She's a lay leader at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, and she jumped in with both feet and became a full-time volunteer. She actually heads up our outreach committee. So with that, I'll say I look forward to hearing from the experts. Thank you.
Well, it's certainly our pleasure to be here today and to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about the work of the Austin Sanctuary Network. It's something that we care very passionately about and have been involved with. Most of us have been involved with it since its inception. One of the things that Peggy asked me to talk about was a little bit about reasons for getting involved in this kind of work. And obviously I can only speak for me and my reasons for involvement, but I think some of them probably would resonate with other folks too. I know a little bit about what it's like to have your dreams destroyed by unjust laws and policies. It took me 24 years after graduating from seminary to get ordained in the Presbyterian system simply because I'm a lesbian. And it took the Presbyterian Church a long time to come to its senses and realize that was not a very loving rule that they had on their books, and to change it. So I understand what it's like to be on the outside wanting to be in and not being allowed. Nothing like what our folks go through when they come across our borders, but at least it relates in some ways. I also like Alice Walker's quote. Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, she says that activism is the rent that we pay for living on the planet. And I very much believe that it is our responsibility to be involved where we see injustice happening. Coretta Scott King said that the struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And it seems like in every generation we've had a new battlefront in which to be involved in order to seek freedom for folks. And this is going to continue to go on. And I think for me, it's not just my calling as a minister, as an ordained minister, it's my calling as a human being to stand up for the voiceless in our world and to resist unjust laws. And I was on a website from North Carolina where they have listed statements from different faith groups, and I just took a couple of quotes from a couple of them. This first one comes from Conservative Judaism, and this was something that they said in 2007. Let the honor of every human being be as dear to you as your own. And then from the Evangelical Free Church of America, immigration policies appear driven by racism and economic self-interest rather than compassion. And our history about standing up against unjust laws goes way back. We stand on the shoulders of such greats as Henry David Thoreau, Susan B. Anthony, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Gandhi, Plato, St. Augustine, and Aquinas, just to name a few. For St. Augustine, an unjust law was no law at all. And then Aquinas went a little bit further with that to say that an unjust law was a human law, not rooted in eternal or natural law. Just laws uplift human beings while unjust laws degrade them, and that as human beings we must stand up against unjust laws. And the reality is that you can't have true freedom without equality. And right now we don't have equality in the United States on many levels, not just on the immigration issue. And the way in which we got involved with Hilda and Yvonne was really initially, Yvonne came to St. Andrews the summer before they moved in for our peace camp. And so we got to meet Yvonne then, and he was able to persuade his mother later when the question came up of seeking sanctuary. He was able to convince his mother that there were nice people at St. Andrews. And so she agreed to come to St. Andrews in February of last year seeking sanctuary. We have learned so much from that experience. First off, we had to claim what we did to Central America back in the 80s. We had to acknowledge that we were culpable. Our government did it, but we paid the bill for them to do it, and we didn't speak out, or at least not enough of us did. And what is being done in our name today that we again are paying for to these people that come across our borders seeking asylum. We learned about that from Hilda and Yvonne firsthand, and it is not a pretty story. If you haven't heard it, I invite you to check it out. And we learned how to walk with the undocumented, not walk for them, but with them. How to walk with our brothers and sisters and to use our privilege on their behalf. We are called upon to use whatever privilege we have, I think, in order to stand up for those who don't have those privileges. And that's what we tried to do at St. Andrews, and that's what we tried to do with the Austin Sanctuary Network. And what we knew, thanks to First UU, who did this before us, with Sulma Franco, what we knew was that we needed a village. We couldn't do it by ourselves. And so we began to form the Austin Sanctuary Network, and you'll hear a little bit more about that a little bit later, I think. But it has been an incredible journey. We have gained far more than Hilda and Yvonne have gained from living in our church. And we are so grateful for the lessons that they have been so willing to teach us and ways in which we can be of help to them.
Well, I'm Josefina Castillo, originally from Mexico City, and I came here to work for the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization, 18 years ago. And among the programs that the American Friends had in Austin were immigration and economic justice. So I learned early on about all the problems of immigrants, and myself being an immigrant, I can understand, the worries that we all have when we migrate. And one of the things that I learned through working with Quakers is that migration and trade that migration is not an isolated issue. It is tightly related to trade as well, and to the policies that this country has put on immigrants south of the border, so that ever since NAFTA was enacted in 1994, just to give you a figure, 2 million people were displaced from their communities in Mexico and had to migrate because of the policies of these corporations and of NAFTA itself. And so we have to understand also the connection between those two issues. Plus also the issue of militarization on borders, because it's, as you know, Trump and also previous governments have been militarizing the southern border. And also, not only that, but Mexico has played the role of a buffer for immigrants. So that right now, if somebody's coming from Brazil or any country, and right now I know that Casa Marianela, another refugee center that holds immigrants, right now they have said that a lot of people from Africa are migrating. So imagine all the travels that they have to do in order to arrive to this country. And one of the problems that they have is precisely crossing through Mexico, with all the dangers that they have to go through, and also crossing the border from Guatemala to Mexico is one of the buffers that they have to go through, and taking the train that is called the Beast, which has had a lot of accidents and the deaths of immigrants. So I won't go through that, but we have heard a lot of stories around it. And so in the work that I do now in Austin tan cerca de la frontera, which means Austin so close to the border, we take delegations to the border, and we see exactly the connections between what I'm telling you, the connections between the impact of trade on Mexican workers, and also the impact of trade in southern communities in Texas, and the militarization along the border, the famous wall, that there are walls all over. They are already there. And also the connection between immigration, because a lot of people, as I said, have been displaced from their communities in Mexico and in Central America mainly, and have come to the border to work in the maquiladoras, which is the process assembly plants along the U.S.-Mexico border that employ low wages, low labor, low paid labor, and eventually some of them cross over to this country. So we see those things, and we know that these people are economic refugees, even though Trump has called them the bad hombres. They are not bad, and they are not even hombres. They are children and women also. So I think that one of the things that we have to be aware of is that immigrants have the right not to migrate, because they would rather stay in their communities instead of migrating. They are not here to take the jobs of others. They are here because they have been pushed by poverty and by lack of resources to look for the welfare of their families. So So I think, just to end with this right now, I think that as a Mexican person that I am, I think that we have to have cultural sensitivity also in terms of knowing what the different cultures are, and also the partners in the global south, in these countries that I'm talking about, don't want to be looked as victims. That's something that we have learned in our delegations. They are persons like any one of us, and they just want us to walk with them, as Babs was saying, you know, not to have pity on them, but to have solidarity. And that's one of the things that we are trying to learn also, and we have learned a lot about, they have taught us a lot about how they managed to survive and how they have resisted a lot of problems through the issue of having to migrate.
I became involved in Austin Sanctuary Network, sanctuary issues, because of my faith and the values that come with that. And being part of Trinity Church, I was able to be part of a congregation that was willing to work on sanctuary issues, as well as be part of the bigger group of the Sanctuary Network. So I feel that's important, rather than trying to work as an individual, being able to work with others in that regard. And by the way, I'll say that churches don't need to worry about losing their 501c3 status so long as they're not backing a specific candidate or political party. You can get involved in this work. Another reason I got involved was, as Babs and Josefina have touched on, what it means for me as an ally. It's an opportunity to work as an equal with undocumented immigrants. I think, unfortunately, in a lot of church history, it's been this helping the less fortunate thing, which creates a one-up, one-down dynamic. And the Sanctuary Network tries to be really clear about working as equals and often taking our lead from the immigrant community as allies. Another thing that sanctuary work allows is for a person to go beyond being an armchair activist. Oftentimes, some of us, we have an intellectual understanding of the issues, we discuss them with other people, but the next step is to get our bodies involved, and the Sanctuary Network allows that. And another reason I got involved was because of the intersectionality of many issues that come together with sanctuary. Babs and Josefina have touched on that. There are economic issues going on with labor. Bob Cash said it well. He said, outsourcing by corporations is the cause of loss of living wage jobs here in the United States. It's not immigrants. That's a false narrative that gets put out. But the truth is, it's outsourcing by corporations. And the free trade agreements, they're not fair trade. It's called free trade. And they degrade labor rights here in the United States, and they create deplorable work conditions for people south of the U.S. border, causing them, as Josefina said, to be motivated to move to a place where they might hope for a better life. And another economic aspect is the for-profit prison industry. Detention centers are largely owned by private corporations, and they have contracts with our federal government for quotas, the number of people in these detention centers, so they have a profit motive to have as many people as possible in the detention centers. What I would say is multinational corporations and governments continue to collude in the name of profit, with deregulation being an example, to further their ideas of development at the cost of lives, livelihood, and the fates of future generations. One example I might give in this limited time is look at Guatemala. They have a rich history of corn different varieties of corn. It's been their major food item, but right now almost half of their corn that they consume comes from the United States, and it's genetically modified corn, and it's corn that's been sprayed with cancer-causing things like Roundup. So moving on then to the racial component that's involved in the sanctuary network, two things come to mind for me. One is SB4, things like that, which is a deliberate attack on people of color, profiling. And then what's happening with indigenous cultures south of the border too. They're the ones taking the brunt of these multinational activities. And that leads me into the environmental aspect of this too. As natural resources become scarcer, the pressure upon them increases with growing population. There's disputes over land rights more and more. They're intensifying, and particularly where there's oil exploration, mining, agribusiness, logging, hydroelectric. Honduras is a great example of that, and it's been indigenous activists trying to protect the people and the land that have taken the brunt of a lot of that. A corollary up here is in the United States with Dakota Access Pipeline and the indigenous people there leading the struggle to maintain the quality of the water, saying water is life, and taking the brunt of corporate and government pushback on that. So in conclusion, well, I want to add too the intersectionality of LGBT issues as well, and your church here taking the lead here in Austin with Sulma Franco. I just want to say it's important to understand the root causes of why people want to migrate, the physical and economic violence of it, and to work with others to address these issues and those most directly affected.
In hope and prayer we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer we're right here. In hope and prayer we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer we're right here. That's what we sang when we were arrested on May 1st at the governor's office during our sit-in protest of Senate Bill 4. It reflects exactly what we were feeling at the moment. We were there to voice our opposition to the law passed by the legislature, but more importantly, we were there to demonstrate that we stand with our immigrant neighbors and Latino, Latina, Mexican, and Mexican-American friends and neighbors, as well as all people of color affected by this hateful law. My name is Ann Glenn, and I'm a member of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, which is an active member of the Austin Sanctuary Network. The Austin Sanctuary Network has been in existence for about a year and a half now, and we began as a group of faith-based and social justice organizations that rallied around Hilda and Yvonne, who came into Sanctuary at St. Andrew's in February of 2016. Along with Sulma Franco, the first person in the Austin area to take Sanctuary at First UU of Austin here, we began meeting and organizing a campaign for Hilda, also from Guatemala, and her son Yvonne, who fled their home seeking safety and relief from violence. So initially, when we first started meeting, we were focused on asylum seekers from Central America. However, as the year progressed, and especially after the election, we felt a need to reassess our goals, and our efforts broadened. We are in the process of rewriting our mission statement to include more than just asylum seekers, and several of us have participated in marches and rallies at City Hall, the state Capitol building, the governor's office, the governor's mansion, in solidarity with the broader immigrant community. We have organized with others to stand with immigrants who have been here for a long time but now live in fear of their families being split up. We also stand with all people who are being affected by the policies of the new administration. The No Ban, No Wall event at the Capitol helped unite groups fighting the ban on people coming to our country, which was a big deal, of course. And then at the same time, there were deportations occurring in Texas and elsewhere. And there was a plan afoot to build a wall between Texas and Mexico, although some of it already exists. The Austin Sanctuary Network began a new program called SITS, which stands for Sanctuary in the Streets. And this program was designed so people of privilege could participate in an effort to interfere with Immigration and Customs Enforcement's deportations. In addition, we began an accompaniment program which takes immigrants who have to go down to San Antonio, usually once a month, to have their ankle monitors checked. The people that own the ankle monitors actually are the same that own the private prisons that keep people in detention. And we also help them go to visit their attorney and appear in their court hearings. We also assisted an individual from Mexico who had been released from the Hutto Detention Center, which is a facility in Taylor, Texas, that houses approximately 500 women that are seeking asylum and that were apprehended at our borders. And we began an effort to expand our network to other congregations, faith groups, and social justice organizations who wanted to help immigrants who were living in a new state of fear. Personally, I don't think that the way our country has dealt with immigration is fair to the people who have immigrated here hoping for a better life. And as other people have already talked about that, in many cases we have contributed to the problems in their countries. We have caused a lot of destruction in their countries because of our own economic and political self-interests. Instead of assisting people fleeing these conditions, we are criminalizing the people that migrate here, along with criminalizing many other immigrants who have been working in our communities for years and living here in a peaceful manner. The resulting emotional turmoil that our policies have caused families, and especially the children of immigrant families, is, in my opinion, shameful and unacceptable. For me, having Hilda and Yvonne in Sanctuary in our church and becoming a part of the Austin Sanctuary Network has been a transforming experience. It opened my heart, and I feel fully present and alive in my engagement. It has provided me an opportunity to channel my energy to practical solutions. I've become better educated about Central America and the reasons people leave their homes and travel to our borders, and working with like-minded people in the sanctuary movement has made me feel that I'm contributing something of value in this time of turmoil. I feel sure I would be experiencing much more despair if there weren't organizations and community groups fighting against what is currently happening in our state government and our country. The Austin Sanctuary Network is growing and maturing in the midst of all the hateful rhetoric that is occurring at the state and national level. This and the compassionate people that I have met, both immigrants and allies of immigrants, makes me hopeful that we will get through this time. Thank you.
Theologians from Canada has said that out of chaos can come change that is good. And we are living in a time of great chaos right now. And so the Austin Sanctuary Network has put together a statement that for the public about where we stand at this time in regards to SB4 and all that is happening. And I just want to read that statement to you. The Austin Sanctuary Network is deeply saddened by the fact that a group of individuals used fear tactics and false information to convince a majority of our legislature that SB4 was a needed piece of legislation. Legislators did this in total disregard of the overwhelming response from many law enforcement agencies, city governments, and countless individuals and churches throughout Texas. This disregard of public opinion is anti-democratic. They passed SB4 in spite of warnings that it was unconstitutional and promotes racial profiling. They did this in conflict with most, if not all, humanitarian and faith-based traditions throughout history. SB4 is reprehensible. This legislation destroys families, encourages bullying, and promotes the use of fear tactics to drive out even our own citizens. These are not humanitarian or faith-based values. Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick should not have pushed such a hate-filled, anti-democratic, personal agenda onto the people of Texas. As a faith-based, inclusive organization, the Austin Sanctuary Network will continue to organize with our undocumented neighbors in Austin and throughout Texas. We stand in solidarity with immigrants who live in our communities and extend to them bold compassion and courageous love. And this is coming from the 25 churches and organizations that are active parts of the Austin Sanctuary Network.
I just want to mention that that we should be, I want to stress the issue of cultural sensitivity when we meet an immigrant, and be conscious of the difference between charity and solidarity, because solidarity means engaging ourselves wholly in the issues of our partners, of our brothers and sisters, and walking with them, as Bab said in the beginning, not in the front, not in the back, but side to side, and as brothers and sisters, and accompanying them as well. Marta Benavides, a minister from El Salvador, has a great project in El Salvador called Century 23rd, and she called it like that because she asked the people living in her community how would they like to see El Salvador in the century 23rd, and they said, well, we would like to have more freedom, we would like to be to have resources, we would like to save our environment. And she said, well, we can start doing that. And then she started working with the parks, and this was like 5 years ago, and up to now they continue working on that. And that brings me the idea that we cannot change the world as it is, but we can change ourselves personally. And if we change ourselves personally, we have a collective around us, our family, our community, our state, and we can start thinking about doing some positive change to these very dangerous times that we're living.
I'm going to give a list of things that a congregation can do short of providing physical sanctuary, which is very important. I want to stress that if SB 4, which it likely will, becomes in effect in September, there will be even more need for physical sanctuary, unfortunately. But Trinity Church is an example of a congregation that can't provide physical sanctuary right now, basically because we rent out our spaces to so many others. We can't do it right now, but there are plenty of other ways that we support sanctuary efforts. And I will say we started out by studying in our social justice class immigration issues. We had an immigration class which included a lot of films, learned a lot there, and then the Sanctuary Network came around, and we had a church service that focused on immigrant issues. And from there, we went to, with the Sanctuary Network, lots and lots of petitions, lots and lots of letters, lots and lots of phone calls, and we were prepared to go to ICE in San Antonio, but didn't need to. And we lobbied city council members by district. Those from the network who lived in the district went and lobbied their individual city council person. We've had congregant and clergy presence at press conferences for Austin Sanctuary Network. We've attended rallies and vigils. We can support physical sanctuary for other congregations or spaces by buying groceries, providing meals perhaps according to what the people in sanctuary want. Maybe tutoring can be provided too. And then there's also the whole issue of counseling. Our church happens to have lots of psychotherapists in it and counselors. We weren't called upon, but Keep in mind, people in sanctuary have been traumatized. They have PTSD in one form or another, and they benefit from psychotherapy, preferably in their language. And then the other thing we as Trinity and others can do is fundraising. Very much needed.
Thank you. So there is a subgroup within the Austin Sanctuary Network that works on outreach, and we have training that's been developed for people that are interested in joining the Sanctuary Network and being a part of the outreach group. If you are interested in getting more information about us, you can go to Facebook and just type in Austin Sanctuary Network, and our Facebook page should come up. You can also contact Reverend Babs Miller at babsmiller@sbcglobal.net. And if you want someone to come and speak to your organization or our faith group, you can also contact me and Glenn at austin.rr.com.
Okay, now we're going to have time, about 20 minutes for question and answer. If you'll raise your hand, I'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Glenn Williams. I'm real interested in the status of Hilda and Yvonne, what's happening with Hilda now. Are there others in the same situation? Are there individuals in sanctuary now? You've already told us we can do help for fundraising, but kind of just a picture of what their life is like now that they're basically kind of trapped in the church. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Because of the campaigns that we put together that Janet referred to about the petitions and phone calls and threatening to go down to ICE, we were able to get Hilda what is called a deferred action. And that meant that she could get a Social Security card, she could get a work permit, and she could get a Texas ID. So we got her those things. And she's free to move about as long as she carries that information with her. The letter said, barring change in circumstance. This is good. Well, we've definitely had a change in circumstance. And while Hilda had planned to move out come the end of the school year, she was going to wait until the end of the school year so that she didn't have to move her son. Originally, she planned to move out at the end of the school year. Now she is going to continue to stay with us at St. Andrews because her deferred action expires in October. And her lawyers have already told her that the chances are pretty slim of getting it renewed under the current administration. So unfortunately, that will mean that come middle of October, she goes back into sanctuary and will not be able to leave the building. Right now, Hilda and Yvonne are the only two in sanctuary in Austin. There are people in other parts of the country that are in sanctuary churches, and we have people right now who are wanting to seek sanctuary. And so part of what we do as part of our outreach is recruiting churches and helping churches to get their buildings ready so that they too can take people into sanctuary. We had lots of phone calls when the raids were going on, but it's kind of calmed back down. But we do have some folks right now that are wanting to seek sanctuary.
Very inspiring. Thank you all so much for the comments you made today, and particularly the insights into how immigration is driven by the greed of people, corporations. And so my question is, could you talk a little bit more about that, the genesis of that movement of people, that diaspora of people from not only Central America but South America based on economic reasons? And usually it's some commonality of greed. Isn't it driven by mostly American corporations?
Well, as I mentioned, I think that this country was founded by immigrants, and we have to remember that. And but right now, the issue has been turning into a hot issue. And of course, the waves of immigrants have changed through the years. First, as I understand, from Europe with Irish people, Germans, etc. And then during the 80s, from Central America, mainly three main countries that were into war, that went into civil war, like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And mainly from El Salvador, 30% 30% of their population migrated into the United States in the 80s. And that's when all these movement of sanctuary movement started in the state of Arizona. And so the issue of sanctuary has been alive since the 80s with the Central American Wars. And of course, through the years in the 90s, when in Mexico there was the great economic downturn, a lot of Mexicans migrated in here. And right now, as I said before, it's mainly people from Africa, from Congo, and from Syria, and all those countries that have been in dreadful internal wars, and also due to the policies of this country. But mainly with globalization that started in the 90s, I think the whole world has gone into benefiting profits, not people. And corporations, I'm sure what you have said about greed, it's very true. And unfortunately, violence breeds more violence. But we in the Sanctuary Network want to breed peace. And this is what we're trying to do, because we believe that small collective of peoples are the ones who make the change in the world.
And I would just remind us that those civil wars that happened in the 80s in Central America, we were very much involved with promoting. And so as a country, we were very culpable in the disasters that caused people to want to leave their countries and come to the United States or just anywhere where it was safe.
My question is this, knowing that actual facts don't seem to matter to a lot of people, what do you say to people who challenge what you all are doing by saying, well, this is taking jobs from Americans who deserve them when these people don't?
I think that there's a lot of misinformation about it, and also I think we have to learn from our own history, and sometimes we don't. And as long as we are safe and we feel safe in our homes, we don't take into consideration all the history of this country and of the world itself. So we have to be alert of what's going on, really. And whenever you go to any of these organizations that are members of the Austin Sanctuary Network, be it churches or be it social justice organizations, the view of the world changes for you, because you see another world that is not around my house, my community. You bridge out to other communities, and you understand the reason, the historical reasons for migrating. So I think that we have to get out there and do something. Even just attending the hearings of the SB4 when it was about to be either passed or not. I went there 2 or 3 times, and every time I heard testimonies of people against the SB4, and even I heard a couple of police officers who were talking against it and were against it, and even though it passed, you see. So I think it has to do with the whole conservative administration in Texas, and this is very sad. But as I said, I think that there are small groups of people who really want to know what's really happening. And one thing that for me has provided that opportunity is being part of the Sanctuary Network.
And I would just ask, who among you wants that job in August of pouring that slab for that building in downtown Austin and smoothing and finishing out that concrete? Any volunteers? They're not taking jobs from us.
Your question reminds me of somebody who said recently, well, you've heard of fat-free diets. We live in a fact-free environment right now, too. So, getting accurate information out there is difficult. And again, I try to get across the message on, one level that it's corporate outsourcing that's creating the loss of jobs with living wages in this country. It's not immigrants. But beyond that, I think oftentimes facts and figures don't get through to people like stories do. You know, stories of people we know. That can convey a lot. And the other thing is I've, in the last, let's say, 9 months, I've asked myself a lot, what's going on with the right wing? And I've read studies that talk about below the cognitive level, at the emotional level, oftentimes there's fear going on. And so trying to, when appropriate, address those fears, I think, can be as important as talking.
When I'm speaking to friends about legality, isn't this what we're doing illegal?
Yes. There are no laws on the books, no matter what lawyers. Some lawyers, I had to listen the other night to a Rais lawyer in San Antonio say that it was legal. It is not. There are no laws on the books that say that you can house individuals seeking asylum in churches and not be prosecuted for that. There's no law in the book that says that. But there is a long history of churches doing exactly that, of cities doing exactly that, of countries doing exactly that. And so we at San Andrews say, come on, we'd love for you to come and try to, take us down, because we know that ICE does not like publicity. And believe you me, there would be a publicity campaign to end all campaigns if they came after us. But no, it is not legal to do what we are doing.
Not legal according to the administration and the civil laws, but what about the Bible laws? You see, where you have the Bible talking all the time about giving refuge to your neighbors and your brothers and sisters. So if we follow that primitive law, that's the one that matters.
I just want to say one thing too. When I was in the 60s, I worked with migrant families, and at that time, people from Mexico came up to work the fields in the Midwest, and then they would go back to Mexico. They would send their money that they earned back to Mexico. In the 80s, during the Reagan administration, a lot of the migrant flow, which was the Bracero program, it was criminalized. So people that we were encouraged, in fact, we began this during World War II, bringing people up, cheap labor, to do work in the fields. And that was all criminalized by Reagan. So it's our administration that has really criminalized all of the people that are here. It's just wrong how we've dealt with this, in my opinion.
One thing that occurs to me is when we talk about legality is that we didn't come by this country legally ourselves. We came over here, we dominated the population that was here and took over, and so the boundaries between the nations that we're talking about are not legal in that sense. They were achieved through force. And when we talk about, and one thing that happens is that the dominant group defines the discourse by defining the language that we use to have the discourse. And I wonder if it wouldn't help us to change some of the terms that we use in the movement. And the word immigrant is a really good example because, we're talking about three groups most of the time. We're talking about the black community, we're talking about the Muslim community, and we're talking about the Native Americans who come up from Central America. And I think particularly in that last case, the word immigrant just doesn't apply to them. It applies to us. We're the immigrants. And yet we call them the immigrants and we sort of adopt that dominant discourse. I just sometimes wonder what it would happen if we changed that discourse and if we started making the point that we're talking about people that we took this land from, who are now struggling under the domination of our Eurocentric, white-centric laws. And so that's...
Yeah, I kind of concur. My grandfather was an undocumented immigrant into the United States, so.
We have about 6 or 7 minutes left. Is there any more questions? Okay. Got a question from Gary Bennett. If you'd stand up, please.
Yeah, I have a point to make, and that is, what is behind all the anti-immigrant thing is the same thing that is against all the anti-Muslim and all the anti-black. That is simply that we have a group of people in the United States that have fanned a recurrence of racism at its most basic level. Anyone who is not white. Of course, this is especially ironic when you look back 100 years when people like the Irish and Italians were considered to be non-white. And it's often their descendants who are adopting this anything but white rhetoric. But any comments?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a deliberate strategy by the dominant powers because it keeps us divided. When there's the other, and then we're not working together to really address a lot of the issues that we all share. So it's important to be mindful of that dynamic.
Hello again, I'm Peggy. And I would just like to ask you if you could speak a little bit about, I know in addition to physical sanctuary, which by the way I would like to say this church is preparing again to be able to take someone into sanctuary along with a couple of our other activist churches or congregations. But what I'd like to ask you about is if you could talk a little bit about the sanctuary in the streets, of taking sanctuary not just into the physical congregations or churches, mosques, and synagogues, but actually taking it into the streets. So if one of you would talk about that.
Yeah, we developed the Sanctuary in the Streets program, and we borrowed this from our brothers and sisters in Philadelphia who've been doing this for far longer than we have. And what the Sanctuary in the Streets program is trying to do is to train as many volunteers as we can. Right now we've got about 300 trained. Our goal is at least 500 in the city of Austin that would be trained on how to do direct action interventions with ICE. And the whole purpose of this is to force ICE to follow their own protocol. If there are no witnesses, if there is no media, if there's no cell phone cameras going, ICE turns into major bullies, and they do not follow their own procedures and protocols. They will kick doors in, they will use all kinds of tactics. ICE can actually lie to people, and it's okay. They can say, I'm an Austin police officer, open the door, even though they're not. ICE does not have the authority to arrest in the city of Austin, so they have to have an Austin police officer with them if they're going to arrest anyone, and yet they detain people and take them down to the jail and ask the jail to hold them until they can check them out, even though they don't have the authority to do that. So what we're trying to do is train people in how to legally interfere with what ICE is doing to the point that ICE is forced to follow their own protocol. As soon as we are notified of a need for something, so is the media, and so are our lawyers. Critical piece, as some of us are finding out right now with what happened at the Capitol. And so our purpose is to get as many people there as possible to witness what's going on, to ask for a search warrant. One of the things that ICE is doing is they have administrative papers that say warrant, but they're not a search warrant. They're signed by an ICE officer. That's not a search warrant, but they're passing that off. They pulled that on Austin when they arrested the young man who was at the courts for a court hearing about something else. And they told him, we've got a warrant and we need to take this guy, and they let them take it, and they didn't have a warrant. Even our own courts didn't look closely at what they had. And so we're trying to teach people to ask for that warrant. We're also, in addition to that, and in cooperation with ICE out of Austin, doing Know Your Rights trainings, which is trying to train the people in the community about their rights, not just our immigrant brothers and sisters, but businesses. During the raids, we had a business who told us, I could have told y'all 2 days ago that ICE was here because they've been sitting in my parking lot for 2 days. And we said, did you know you could have asked them to leave? No, they didn't know that. Did you know that you could ask them not to come into your establishment? No, they didn't know that. Had they notified us 2 days prior that ICE was in their parking lot, we could have saved some folks from getting picked up. And so we're trying to help them understand what their rights are. Help all of us understand what our rights are. Because let's face it, white middle-class America generally has pleasant interactions with the police. Unless you're drunk and disorderly, unless you've got a bag full of drugs, you're not going to have an officer in your face yelling and screaming at you. And so we want people to know what their rights are in all situations so that they can be better prepared to take care of themselves and avoid ICE being able to pull bullying tactics to round up people.
Okay, we're about out of time. Would y'all like to make a closing statement, please?
I would mainly say, come join us. We need all the folks that we can muster, because it takes, we have that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to do this work also. And so we invite you, if you have any interest at all, to get in touch with us, and we will be glad to find a place where your talents can help us in this battle with our own government.
I would just add that whatever you learn in your everyday chores or coming here or wherever, just spread the word out to your family, to your community, and in that way we can start changing this unjust world.
I just want to say thank you, Peggy, for organizing this forum, and thank you all for coming.
I agree. Thanks for coming. We appreciate the interest, and I just want to say educate yourself about what's really going on. Thank you.
Let's give the panel a hand.